Because of this law and because of today's decision, millions of Americans who I hear from every single day will continue to receive the tax credits that have given about 8 in 10 people who buy insurance on the new marketplaces the choice of a health care plan that costs less than $100 a month.
President Obama doing a victory lap, if you will, after the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Affordable Care Act. We are now joined by Richard St. Paul, Republican strategist and former vice chair for the National Black Republican Association. So nice to see you tonight.
Good to see you.
And a brother can use some help. So I need you to help me out here with these two. So, Counselor, you have argued before the Supreme Court. I'm going to ask you about today's ruling in just a second. But the other counselor at the table, Mr. St. Paul, you saw Reverend Sharpton's interview.
Very good job.
Okay, well, on this side, he can understand the issues that Reverend Sharpton is talking about. You don't. I don't want you to comment because it'll get worse. What do you think of the Sharpton interview?
I thought, first of all, I thought the interview was very good. I thought it covered a lot of base. But you know, Sharpton is always a interesting character, I would say, and I don't think his role should be so much played into politics as it is. He is an advocate for people, and his closeness with the president inviting Sharpton and Mark Morrell and Ben Jealous to a job summit, that's not the place for advocate. And I think that Sharpton's better off staying out of politics. I mean, he's very close to Bill de Blasio, so much so that he's seen as Bill de Blasio's policymaker. And I think that's a real problem for not only the Mayor de Blasio, but also for Sharpton in terms of his legacy.
Okay, take the personality out. As Mr. Levinson argues, is Reverend Sharpton arguing principle here?
Well, I could tell you, look, principle based on what? Based on what works for him? I mean, he's certainly exactly. He's certainly come along. I remember Sharpton in the '80s. Okay, he's come a long way. He's got his own show. He's not one of us anymore in terms of socially, economically. He's very wealthy now.
My question is, and good
for
his wealth.
Well, when you don't pay taxes, you can get wealthy pretty quickly.
We can continue to attack the messenger, and maybe there's time in the show to do that. What I'm trying to raise is that the existence of the Confederate flag, so prevalent in so many cities and towns throughout this country, is so symbolic of race and hatred that it allows an environment to exist where shootings in churches happen. And I'm suggesting that average citizens have an obligation to stand up in the face of racism and say that's wrong and show outrage.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with that, but Al Sharpton hasn't led that movement. I mean, he was nowhere in terms of let's get rid of the Confederate flag. He's focusing on other issues.
I actually don't think that's actually accurate.
What do you mean when you say get rid of it? Define the term of get rid of it.
The end of you. I'm sorry.
What do you mean about get rid of the flag? Define the term.
What I'm suggesting, first and foremost, that average citizens, because you lectured me on the role of citizenry, I think average citizens have an obligation to speak up.
That's fine.
When they say racism. So when I think when the existence of a Confederate
they have an obligation to speak up. If they agree with your position, they should speak up.
Again, what I said was specifically, in the face of racism, they have an obligation to speak up. And if one believes that the Confederate flag is a symbol of racism, then one has an obligation to speak out against its common use.
Speak out is fine.
And so I'm not so concerned. If you just let me finish the thought. I know, but if you let me finish the thought, you can ask all the questions.
Do you think that a private citizen has the right to fly the flag in his window?
I think the private citizen has an obligation to stand up to that citizen and say, take the flag down.
And what if fair, I agree with that. What if the person refuses?
Organize pickets. Organized protests.
That's fair. That's fair.
Throw rocks.
Okay, Mr. Paul, you have the final say. Okay, if you have the final say on this topic, we got to move on to Obamacare quickly.
But you don't think they should be
the First Amendment is a very important amendment, and a private citizen should be able to keep the flag in their window.
But I think we need
and I think we have
Mr. St. Paul, even if it's a Confederate flag, they should be allowed to keep that flag in the window.
Absolutely, it's their personal right to do so, and I will defend it if they want to. But it should not fly at the state capitol, and there's bipartisan support that agrees with that. Both Republicans and Democrats.
Okay, but guys,
and I would say that about someone who has a swastika in the window.
Absolutely,
but when we all talk, no one at home could hear anything that we're saying. So, Counselor, I've got a few minutes left here for Obamacare before we move on to the next segment. You've argued before the Supreme Court. Now, Judge Roberts, Chief Judge Roberts, a Bush appointee, George W. Bush, has given this Democratic president 2 major victories.
Right. Well, all bets are off in these political cases, and it's quite not unusual at all for there to be result-oriented decisions out of the Supreme Court. What is very unusual about this decision is how open and how blunt the result-oriented nature of the decision was. What are the two pillars of the decision? One, he says it's inartfully drafted, the statute, so he takes it upon himself and the court to fix the inartful drafting. Very unusual for the Supreme Court to be doing that. More importantly, he comes right out and says, unless we sustain it as written, there's going to be a calamitous result. A calamitous result, an open admission that it's a result-oriented decision. Again, happens all the time because you can find a legal rationale for doing anything. Very unusual.
Did it surprise you he went with the liberals on the court?
It does surprise me because in many ways this challenge was much stronger than the last one. So I was on the show last night saying I think that they will strike down the IRS interpretation of the regulation. So it stunned me, really, that he came out and did it this overtly.
And I'm actually curious, the council knows more about these politics than I do inside the court, how much of a rebuke this is of Scalia. You know, Scalia leading the dissent and heading the way and going so far out in what he said during the dissent, it seems like that could at least point to a shifting in the court, and I wonder whether you see it that way.
Well, I think that you knew exactly where Scalia would go with this, and this wasn't far out for him at all. This is how he writes.
Right?
As a textualist, what we've seen from Roberts is that he's very concerned about the public perception of the court. We know its credibility is sinking. They see it, the public does, and as an increasingly politicized institution. He wants to reverse that trend. And also, he's very concerned as Chief Justice about his legacy going forward. We saw that with the last Obamacare decision. We saw that with the first gay marriage decision, and we will likely see it again Monday with the next one.
And I certainly think, just based on the decision, we won't see the end of trying to repeal Obamacare or making amendments to Obamacare, because I think what the Chief Justice said is so correct, is that it was inartfully formed. So there's a lot to go through in the Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act that needs to be corrected.
What does this mean for the Republican presidential candidates?
I think it certainly means
Did it give them an out?
No. Well, yeah, certainly in terms of saying that it's going to be tougher to repeal the whole thing, but I don't think that stops the challenges, because there obviously are other issues. The cost of Obamacare, and that cost is going to transfer to the states soon enough. There has already been an increase in premiums that you pay also in
Quickly,
under the Obamacare.
and then I've got to take a break.
And the bottom line is this is a great thing for the Democrats. It's a great thing for Hillary.
Obama's legacy, what does it do for his legacy?
It allows for continuity for the Democratic Party. There's no feeling, as much as there's this undercurrent of anti-Obamaism, there's no current for changing direction, and that's what's key for the Dems.
Up next, Donald Trump has already shaken up the Republican field, and Chris Christie is expected to be the next guy jumping in. Is that more bad news? He doesn't jump? He moves slowly?
You've seen him in a baseball uniform.
Is that more bad news for the GOP?